everybody, and welcome back to Take Juan. Okay, I have seen Dune Part 2. For those of you who watch my video of my top 10 most anticipated movies of 2024, you know that Dune Part 2 was my number one most anticipated film of this year. I can't wait to tell you about this movie. That said, before I do so, I thought I should give you some brief context of my relationship with the Dune franchise. So, the first time I read the Dune books was during the pandemic back in 2020. I didn't read all the books in the Dune series, I only read the first 4, but I absolutely loved them. I think what I love the most about these books is how they very beautifully mix together big science fiction ideas, deep philosophical questions, and political intrigue and backstabbing, similar to the one that you would expect from something like Game of Thrones, for instance. I adored those books. That said, for those of you who have read the books, you know how complex, deep, metaphysical they get at certain points. So when I was watching it, I kept asking myself, how the hell is anyone going to adapt this into a visual medium? Not only because the text itself was extremely challenging, but also because different people in the past have tried adapting Dune, and quite honestly, they have failed miserably. Back in 1974, Alejandro Jodorowsky, who in my opinion is one of the most insane filmmakers in film history, right after he made The Holy Mountain, which in my opinion is one of the most insane movies I've ever seen, right after he made that movie, he tried to adapt Dune. And his version of Dune would have been absolutely insane. It wouldn't have been anything like the book. It would have probably been a horrible adaptation of the Dune story. But it would have been crazy and it would have been fascinating. Just to give you a little example of how crazy this movie was going to be, well, let me give you some facts. Freaking Mick Jagger, yes, the frontman of the Rolling Stones, he was going to play Fade Rautha in Alejandro Jodorowsky's Dune. The one and only Orson Welles, the director of Citizen Kane, he was going to play the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. Oh, and Salvador Dali, as in the artist, Salvador Dali, he was going to play the Emperor of the Universe. That's crazy enough. But on top of all of that, oh yeah, by the way, Pink Floyd was going to make the score for this movie. So Alejandro Jodorowsky's Dune would have been an insane, insane movie. That said, it never happened. The project crashed and burned, and it became one of the most famous movies to never be released. By the way, if you're interested in Jodorowsky's Dune and in what this movie could have been like, I would highly recommend you to check out a documentary called Jodorowsky's Dune. I think it came out in 2013. It is one of my favorite documentaries of all time, and it is a documentary telling you exactly that, what this movie would have been like, and it is absolutely insane. Definitely check it out. So, Alejandro Jodorowsky failed to adapt Dune in 1974. That said, 10 years later, in 1984, David Lynch directed a Dune adaptation, an adaptation of the first book. And in my opinion, David Lynch's Dune is just a very, very bad movie. It is not enough of a David Lynch movie, and it is not enough of a Dune movie. So, in my opinion, it just failed on every single possible front. So yeah, after those examples, I genuinely thought, this is extremely challenging. How does anyone adapt Dune into a visual medium? That said, when they announced that Denis Villeneuve would be the one tackling Dune once again, and that Denis Villeneuve would be directing an adaptation of the first Dune book, I instantly became curious. Because in my opinion, if there was anyone that could pull this through, if there was anyone that could make a great Dune adaptation, it is Denis Villeneuve. Not only has Denis Villeneuve directed some of my favorite movies of all time, of course, I'm talking about movies such as Prisoners, Sicario, Incendies, Enemy, and many, many more. Not only that, but he has also proven time and time again that he knows how to make big science fiction movies that are not just blockbusters, but also have deep intellectual themes and deep philosophical questions. Of course, I'm talking about movies such as Enemy and Blade Runner 2049, which in my opinion are also masterpieces and everyone should watch them. But yeah, as soon as they announced that Denis Villeneuve would be directing a Dune adaptation, that he was actually going to turn the first Dune book into 2 movies, I instantly became even more excited. Because the first Dune book is dense. A lot happens in that book. And generally, if you try to adapt Dune, the first Dune book, into a 2-hour movie, that's just not enough time. There's just so much you end up cutting out to the point that the final result ends up being nothing like Dune. Just Ask David Lynch's Dune. There's a reason why that movie failed. So I loved everything that I was hearing. And then when Dune Part 1 came out in 2021, I absolutely adored it. So after that, I couldn't wait for Dune Part 2. As I said, it was my number one most anticipated movie of 2024. And then this past Sunday, I was able to watch it in an advanced screening for fans, and it was just one of the best cinematic experiences I've had in a while. So, what did I think of Dune Part 2? Denis Villeneuve did it again. Dune Part 2 is an absolute masterpiece. I not only think it is definitely the best movie of 2024 so far, but in my opinion, it is just one of the best science fiction movies I've ever seen, period. I adore this movie. Denis Villeneuve's directing is once again top tier. I still can't believe Denis Villeneuve didn't get nominated for Best Director for his work in Dune Part 1, but I genuinely think he better get nominated for Dune Part 2 because his directing is insane. The way he handles the battle scenes is quite frankly just, you're watching an expert at work. But not only that, but one of my favorite things about the Denis Villeneuve Dune movies is the way he handles scale and proportions. When you're watching one of Denis Villeneuve's Dune movies, you feel just how enormous everything is. Whether it is a building, a spaceship, a spacecraft, or a crowd of people, you feel the weight, you feel the tension, you know just how absolutely giant and enormous everything is. And that just gives a sense of scale to Dune that it's quite frankly unprecedented, and I've almost never seen before. Apart from that, every single element of this movie is just at a 10 out of 10. The music by Hans Zimmer is once again incredible. Of course, Hans Zimmer won the Oscar for his music for Dune Part 1. I generally think he did as good of a job, if not better, with Dune Part 2. The music in this film is unlike anything you've heard before, and it gives the Dune movies such a unique identity that is, honestly, I can't stress it enough how great of a job Hans Zimmer did with the score for Dune Part 2. But not only the music, the freaking cinematography from Greg Fraser is once again mind-blowing. Some of the visuals that he's able to capture just had me at awe in that movie theater. And once again, no spoilers. I'm not going to spoil the movie, but I think some of my favorite visuals in this film were the visuals that were captured at Gaidi Prime. Gaidi Prime is the home planet of the Harkonnens, the bad guys, the evil people in the movie. And some of the cinematography at display in Gaidi Prime is quite honestly just mind-blowing. It's absolutely insane. The stuff he did with infrared and black and white, and even the small details like the fireworks. Even the fireworks in Gaidi Prime are absolutely jaw-dropping. Greg Fraser, can't stress it enough. Absolutely fantastic work. And speaking of Gaidi Prime, I have to talk about the villains. Because the villains in this movie are once again absolutely insane. The villains that we already know from Dune Part 1, Dave Bautista as the Beast Raban, and Stellan Skarsgård as Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, they are once again incredible, super terrifying, super intimidating, and scary, and absolutely evil. But the new villain that is introduced in this movie, Austin Butler as Feyd-Rautha. Yes, Austin Butler, the guy who played Elvis Presley in 2022's Elvis, which, by the way, was the first movie I ever reviewed in this channel, and I love the guy, I love his performances. But what he does with Feyd-Rautha is just something completely new and different and insane. The character introduction for Feyd-Rautha, the first scene where you see him at, is generally one of the best character introductions I've ever seen for a villain in film history. He is instantly so scary and so evil. Absolutely amazing scene, and from that point onwards, it just keeps getting better and better. Austin Butler keeps giving more and more to his portrayal of Feyd-Rautha, to the point that at the end of the movie, you are so invested, it is so intense, and you can't wait to see what's gonna happen. So the villains in this movie, absolutely insane. That said, the villains are not the only great characters in this movie. Of course, everyone else is also incredible. Paul Atreides, played by Timothée Chalamet, Rebecca Ferguson playing Lady Jessica, Zendaya as Chani. All the characters are absolutely incredible. That said, There are two in particular that I want to highlight. The first one that I want to highlight is Florence Pugh as Princess Irulan. Now, Florence Pugh is not in a lot of the movie, okay? She's basically as much in Dune Part 2 as Zendaya was in Dune Part 1, which is to say, not a lot. That said, from the very few scenes that we have with Florence Pugh in Dune Part 2, she leaves an impression. And just a little detail for the book readers, I love the fact that in this movie we see Princess Irulan writing the various diary entries that we know and love from the book. For those of you who don't know, every single chapter of the first Dune book begins with a little passage from a diary written by a so-called Princess Irulan. That said, when you're just starting to read the first book, you have no idea who this so-called Princess Irulan is. So, for a big portion of you reading the first book, you're just confused trying to figure out who this person is. That said, when she finally shows up towards the end of the book, everything makes sense, everything fits into place, and it is just such an incredible detail from the part of Frank Herbert. And I love the fact that Denis Villeneuve honored that detail in this movie. We actually see her writing those diary entries. And I know it's a small detail, it's only for the book fans, but I freaking loved it. So that was the first character that I wanted to highlight. And then the second character that I wanted to highlight is Javier Bardem as Stilgar. I don't remember loving Stilgar as much as I do when I'm watching these movies. Yeah, he was a great character in the books, but in these movies, I just absolutely adore his character. And I genuinely think one of the reasons why I love this character so much as portrayed in the movies is because in the movies, they give Stilgar a lot more comedy than in the books. Honestly, the adaptation of Stilgar from the books into the movie reminds me a lot of what they did with the character of Gimli in the Lord of the Rings books/movies. For those of you who have read The Lord of the Rings, you know that in the books, Gimli, he wasn't the funniest of characters. He was a pretty serious character. That said, when they did the Lord of the Rings movies, they turned him pretty much into the comedic relief, and it was absolutely amazing, You have Gimli asking people to toss him into battle and, competing against Legolas to see who can kill more people. I love that detail, and I genuinely think that with Stilgar, they did something similar. In the books, he's very stoic, he's very serious, and in the movies, they just turn him into comedic relief, and that's not a bad thing. I absolutely love it. So in conclusion, I absolutely adored Dune Part 2. Even though I think Dune Part 1 is a masterpiece, I think somehow Dune Part 2 is even better. I think it's one of Denis Villeneuve's best movies. I think it's by far the best movie of 2024 so far, and I genuinely think it's up there as one of the single greatest science fiction movies ever made. I think the best way I can put it is, in my opinion, and I'm being completely honest here, in my opinion, the Dune movies, Dune Part 1 and Dune Part 2, these Dune movies are to science fiction what The Lord of the Rings was to fantasy. And I mean that. So yeah, if I were to give Dune a score in between 1 to 10, I would give it a 10 out of 10. It's an absolute masterpiece. One of the best movies I've ever seen. Can't wait to see Dune Messiah. And that is it for my review of Dune Part 2. If you watched it, please let me know what you thought about it in the comments. I am genuinely very, very curious. But that is it for this episode of Take One. Goodbye.
Yeah.